This month is essentially focused on those of you who didn't match with genetic counseling programs.
Welcome to Genetic Counseling Awareness Channel with Katie Lee. All the best resources you'll ever need at Genetic Counseling Awareness Channel.
Hi everyone, it's me, Katie Lee, CGC, and welcome back to my channel. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you can be notified when I release more videos. On today's episode of Wannabe Wednesday, I'm going to be interviewing Laura, who is a 3-time reapplicant to genetic counseling programs. If you haven't already checked last week's Wannabe Wednesday out, check it out. I interviewed a current student at Kane University named Rebecca, who was also a reapplicant. So this month is essentially focused on those of you who didn't match with genetic counseling programs. I'm really hoping to give you all some tangible advice about how to move on, what you can think about for next steps. And over the course of this series, I'm interviewing 2 women who reapplied until they got into a genetic counseling program and 2 women who moved on to different career paths. Let's get into the interview with Laura. Laura is a first-year genetic counseling student at Sarah Lawrence College. She shared about her experience applying to genetic counseling programs 3 times through blogs, videos, and through Twitter. She's super excited to start her first rotation in pediatrics at Maimonides Medical Center. She's currently working on her thesis, which is going to be investigating the relationship between genetics healthcare and the child welfare community. She currently lives in New York City with her partner and her beloved cat, Santa. Laura, thanks for being here. I'd love to hear about your journey to genetic counseling graduate school.
I started being interested in genetic counseling at the beginning of college. I was a genetics major and I heard about it in our careers class and I was immediately interested. But I didn't do very well in my freshman year of college. So it was kind of a big uphill battle to even get qualified with a GPA enough and to get good enough grades to even apply. But I did end up applying my senior year. I interviewed at 2 places my first cycle and I did not get in. I interviewed at 4 places my second cycle and did not get in. And I actually only interviewed at 3 my third cycle, but I did match to Sarah Lawrence. So it was a long time coming. I went from undergrad to working at a cancer center to working in clinical trials and finally found the right fit eventually.
After both your first and your second time applying, did you know right away that you were going to reapply to school, or is it something that you had to think about for a couple of weeks or months?
Yeah, so the first time I kind of figured I wouldn't get in the first time. So it was immediately knew I was going to go for a second. But after the second, I actually didn't decide to reapply until September. I took a couple of prereqs to go to nursing school and decided it probably wasn't, I was open to it in the future, but I decided to go for one more genetic counseling cycle. It just seemed like that, I don't know, getting into a whole different field might take a while anyway. So I decided to try one more time with genetic counseling and I ended up getting in.
That was it. So besides nursing school, well, tell me more about how you came to nursing school as a possible plan B and if there were other career options you were considering.
Yeah, pretty much just that was my plan. It wasn't really a plan B, I guess. After I had gone unmatched, I was thinking about trying a 3rd time. But some of my feedback was kind of this field might not be right for you. It may not match with your strengths. So I kind of took that to heart and decided to try to play my strengths somewhere else. So I took anatomy and I think microbiology over that summer, which were nursing school prereqs. And I had all of the class prereqs to apply, but there were some labs that I was missing. And it was a little bit hard to do labs from home or while I was a full-time student, or not a full-time student, but a full-time employee. So I was this might take a whole nother year to even get ready to do this. And I'm still really interested in genetic counseling. So I'm glad that I took those courses. It did give me some kind of option and give me insight that I would be interested to take, the same skills that I had somewhere else. But ultimately kind of decided, let's just give genetic counseling one more try. 3rd time isn't so bad.
Oh, that feedback that you mentioned is rough. That is like makes my heart hurt hearing it. In grad school, for example, like we were just talking about, you're about to start your first clinical rotation. You do get a lot of feedback. And my kind of belief on feedback is you take a moment to sit with it. You throw out the feedback you don't agree with. You take in the feedback that you do agree with, or you can at least see part of it. How was it getting feedback like that? I honestly, it's hard for me to imagine someone telling me that about a career I've been working towards for a number of years.
Yeah. It was difficult for sure. I understood where they were coming from because I was working for Crisis Text Line and I was doing a lot of text-based counseling, and I talked about how much I liked that and I liked working with teenagers. And she basically was like, we just thought that, that isn't exactly what we do. We don't use text, and we don't really, counsel teens and things like that. And I was like, well, I see where they got that from. And that's totally fair. I think that I just, like you said, I just sat with that for a while and thought, yes, I do have other strengths that may be applicable to other fields and I should think about it. But ultimately I decided that those were still important skills to bring to genetic counseling and that it was okay. I just didn't apply to that program again. Yeah. And it was important skills to bring to genetic counseling. We're all different patients, different needs, and all of us are needed in this field.
Yeah, absolutely. I can think of so many things. Like just at my last job, I was working on developing a chat bot and what our responses would be for people who reach out with questions, which is essentially like texting. And some of it was counseling based, not just answering, informational questions. So I feel like that's totally relevant. And of course, there's teenagers with diagnoses that need to be counseled all the time. Did you get any feedback that was like easier to apply, things that you could concretely, develop a skill or take another class, redo a prerequisite if your grade wasn't high enough, anything like that was actually useful for the next cycle?
The most helpful things for me was basically it comes down to interview skills. I think it's about like having confidence and knowing that you are worthwhile to accept into the program. And I kind of had a hard time conveying that. I also have ADHD, so it could be hard for me to stay focused in a long form one-on-one conversation. And I totally understand why that's a concern for genetic counseling. So a lot of the feedback that was most useful was just to think about my confidence and think about improving my internal self-esteem so that I could really sell myself to programs. And I think that's what made the difference really in the third cycle, even though I did, add other volunteering and, take UC's cardio gen class or whatever. Mm-hmm. What really made the difference is like just believing that I was worthwhile and being able to present that to a program.
Yeah, I agree. Those interview skills are so important to develop. And it's really hard, especially if you are a more like fresh out of undergrad type of applicant, or you haven't had that much experience applying to different jobs yet. So you're just not that comfortable with interviewing. It's one of those things that can be a little bit hard to get practice with too, because it's awkward to do with family and friends oftentimes and not quite the same as a real interview situation. I'll share how I practiced interviewing. My undergrad campus had practice interviews all the time, and I was always encouraged to do them. So I just did a bunch and got a lot of feedback and really gained confidence there. So that was the main way I improved on interviewing. And then besides that, I just had a few jobs since being out of undergrad that I got to practice in. What were the ways that you were able to work on interviewing for that last cycle where you got in?
Yeah, I did that too. I did use my undergrad center, and I actually did that after my first cycle. I went and used them because I think you have to be graduated in the past year to use them. After that, I think it was more like I went to therapy for my ADHD and just like talked about how I have trouble connecting with people on a personal level and just like talk through like the actual internal things that were holding me back from presenting myself confidently. Mm-hmm. So I really think that it was about taking care of my mental health, because a lot of times I would practice interview and they would go like, yeah, you did fine, like you did well. But I think it was more internal things that I was holding on to, like not truly believing that I was worth accepting, that made it difficult for me to interview well.
That's a great point. And it's awesome to get that going before grad school, because there isn't always that much time for therapy during grad school. And it definitely can shake
Yeah.
your confidence sometimes when you don't do as well in a class as you thought you should have, or don't do as well in a rotation or with a specific patient as you thought you should have. I know you've mentioned a few things here, like working on confidence, taking a few courses. Is there anything else you haven't mentioned that you specifically did to improve applications, or have you mentioned about everything that you kind of went through? And obviously you were gaining work experience, it sounds like, too, and switched jobs a couple of times.
Yeah. So I started in a cancer lab and I did about a year and a half of um, like specimen accessioning, which was a good job for first out of school. And I think one of my major improvements for the third time was that I got a job where I was more patient facing and could speak more to like how I interact with the general public and how I handle challenging interactions and how I give bad news. So I was working in clinical trials. I did recruitment, and I worked on a lot of mental health studies. And I ultimately ended up working on the COVID vaccine study for Moderna.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So it was a lot of patient interaction, and it was sometimes like giving people the news, like, I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to qualify for this. And sometimes when they were, in a really desperate situation with their mental health and were going all the way to like a trial, it's hard to give them that news. So I could speak more to like how I provided them empathy and resources when they're, at the end of what they know how to do for their mental health.
Yeah, that sounds like a very translatable job. How did you find
Yeah.
that one?
LinkedIn. It was interesting because it was down in Arizona and I had been living in Salt Lake. So after my second cycle, I was very tired of living in the same area where I went to school, and I was ready for something new. So I just kind of spontaneously decided to move down to Arizona, and I set up a few job interviews down there and just kind of went down there and found something. And it was very helpful for my mental health to just like kind of move on with my life and not feel like I was waiting. That's a big thing I always tell people, like, not to put your life on hold. Like, if you want to do something, if you want to change the way your life is, just do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a super helpful thing for me to ultimately get in, because I was following what I felt like I needed to do to get to the next step in my life. I was just waiting.
Yep. Yeah, I feel like that's good advice for so many mental struggles or big hurdles in anyone's life. That's kind of how I feel about fertility too, is I have infertility, but I'm not putting my life on hold for it anymore, because you don't know when something good or bad is going to happen, but it's not worth just waiting around. But what else is there that you did to just cope with the mental toll of not getting in? Because it's a knock to the confidence and, all the time and efforts you've put in.
Yeah, I mean, it took time. I was not accepting of it for the first day or week. It took time. And I think that it took deciding to carry on with my life and do the things that I wanted to do, and just think of myself more as like young and untethered rather than like unwanted. Like, I'm free to do whatever I want over this next year.
Young and untethered. I like that.
Yeah. Also, another thing I did was start volunteering at a humane society, which I'd always wanted to do, but I was like, that's so irrelevant. But I ended up talking about it in interviews. Like, you can always apply what you're doing to genetic counseling. Like, don't let trying to fit into the box or trying to fill out your application decide what you want to do with your life. Just like do what feels good to you,
Mm-hmm. And I think it's actually really advantageous to have some of those experiences that are a little bit outside of the box and also tie into your own personal interests. Like, you obviously must be a big animal lover if you wanted to take that type of volunteer position. And it helps you stand out from the crowd a little bit, because, everyone's doing crisis text line and all of those common advocacy experiences. So I think that's good advice too.
Yeah, I loved it. I got to like kind of introduce dogs to the public sometimes. And I was like, wow, this actually is really relevant. I get to like advocate for this dog and be like, have you thought about this animal right here? Really needs a home. So like true advocacy.
So fun. Oh.
Yeah.
What about, I've got some questions from my viewers about like dealing with family and friends, and sometimes even partners who don't understand how big of a deal this is, how much work went into it, and truly how hard it is to match with a program, and that you can really be completely set up for success and a great applicant and not get into a program.
Yeah, at first, for sure. that's kind of why I started writing like blog posts, is like I just wanted to make it, I got so much confusion from the people in my life that I just wanted to like make everything public and out there. So that's one reason. I am very fortunate that I have a very understanding partner who really gets the process. So that's been super helpful. If you have just even one person who gets it, that's a big thing. So like my partner and the people on Discord that really understand have been really helpful throughout the process. I found that I had more fear about telling people that I didn't get in than actually was like merited. When I told my recommenders, like for the second time I didn't get in, they're like, wow, I'm so sorry to hear that. I'm fully behind you for the next time. Like you think that they're going to react like, oh, I can't believe it. You're such a waste of my time. They're not. They've been through rejection too. They know how it is.
Right, exactly. Well, is there any other insight you can offer and share with my audience for those applicants who didn't match the cycle and are trying to decide what their next step should be?
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to rush it. Like I said, I didn't decide to reapply for a third time for a couple of months. I thought about other career paths. I even started preparing for some. So it's totally okay if you take the time to think about it and just kind of feel it out over time. I felt like I wanted to take some nursing school prereqs and see how it was, so I did it. And I wanted to get a patient-facing job, so I did it. And eventually you'll kind of find yourself on the right path. Even if it leads you back to genetic counseling or somewhere else, like just kind of follow what feels right in the moment and what will make you feel like you're progressing.
And how are you feeling now as a first year, almost about to transition into a second year genetic counseling student, about the program you matched at and how things are going? Does it feel like you're in the right place?
Yes, I love Sarah Lawrence. I feel like ultimately it was down to finding the right fit for me, finding some place that was looking for what I offer. And it took a while, but it turned out okay. And I'm so glad for the experiences that I had between my first cycle and finally getting in, because they've been really advantageous in the program. Like I volunteered as a NICU cuddler, and that's, yeah, I loved that. I was a NICU cuddler for a while, and that's been like really insightful experience going into my pediatric rotation because I do NICU consults. So I'm like, yeah, I know how the NICU functions and I know some of the common needs of the babies there. So whatever kind of experience you build, even if it's not the thing that gets you in, will be something that contributes to your ultimate career. So no regrets of anything that I did during those cycles.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Laura. I really appreciate it. I really hope you all enjoyed that interview with Laura. I thought that she was so insightful when she shared about not getting stuck in the fact that you're reapplying and you're in limbo, if you will, for another year, but rather of thinking of yourself as being free and being able to do whatever you want, and kind of to reverse the narrative that might be in your head. I also liked her tip about going to therapy. If you're struggling with interview confidence and you've already done a bunch of practice interviews and you find that you're not really improving much there, I think therapy could be a great way to kind of explore what's going on within yourself. And it's not a bad practice to get in and see a therapist anyways, because not matching with the genetic counseling program is a big life event. Anyways, thanks for watching, you guys. Take care.